So, I've been alluding to this as we've kicked off the day. There is a lot of terminologies, a lot of vocabulary, a lot of different things, and a lot of things that you have to unlearn. Now, when it comes to terminology and vocabulary, most of it is national concepts. Most of it. Not all, but most of it. And so I told you, Quizlet is fine if you want to utilize it for vocabulary. Prep Agent is fine for vocabulary. Our textbook has some vocabulary. We've got some flashcards in Learn Test Pass. But you do need to know the vocab. Now, I'll tell you this. I haven't vetted it yet, but I have a student in one of my other classes who took the time and typed up this amazing flashcard PDF. I mean, it's like pages upon pages and very well put together. I'm still reading through it to make sure she put everything in right. But as soon as I check on everything, I'm sure she doesn't care if I share it because she shared it with the rest of the other class. And so I will share with you folks. Not that there's not other resources, but she's very well put together. And so I just got to vet it before I share it with you to make sure there's no typos or errors in there. But there's a lot of vocabulary. A lot of words that you're going to hear for the first time. A lot of words that you've heard before and you don't understand. And so I'm going to give you an example of that in just a second. Now here's where the vocabulary typically starts, okay? I told you, in the real estate world, a lot of people will use the terminology broker, realtor, and real estate agent interchangeably. And arguably, they're all different. Well, same thing is true when you hear the word land, real estate, and real property. Now for your test, more often than not, they are interchangeable. But let me give you the definition really quick. When you hear the term land from a textbook or legal point of view, land is the earth's surface, everything below and everything above it. Why? Because when you own a piece of dirt, you own the resources underneath that dirt. If there's oil in the ground, it's yours. If there's gold, lithium, right? Whatever it may be, it's yours. Because when you own the dirt, you own everything below the dirt. That's called subsurface rights. Well, when you own the dirt, you own everything above it. That's called air rights. So when we say land, that's what it means. The earth's surface plus everything below and everything above. When we say real estate, it's that definition of land plus all improvements thereon. Trees, houses, bushes, fences, patios, pools. The improvements can be man-made or natural. That's what we mean by improvements thereon. So that's the definition of real estate. And then the word real property, right, is that real estate plus what we call a bundle of legal rights, a set of rights that you are legally said to have in conjunction with owning this piece of real estate. Now, when we talk about a test question, we say, you know, this person purchased a piece of land, real estate, real property. Use them interchangeably on the test. We're not trying to trick you. The only times the differences matter is if they ask you what's the difference between the definition of land and real estate, or between real estate and real property. We're never trying to trick you when we say somebody purchased land, somebody purchased real property, we're not trying to trick you, I promise. But that's the nuanced definition of land, real estate, real property. And we're going to talk about this again when we circle back around and get into unit. For us, it's not unit 1. It'll be in our unit 2.
What did you say about the real property?
Real property is real estate plus what we call a bundle of legal rights. So real estate is the land, everything above and below. All the improvements, both man-made and natural, that's real estate. And then real property adds in plus what we call a bundle of legal rights. When you are said to own real property, you have a list of rights that you have with it. Like the right to dispose of your property, the right to exclude other people from entering your property, the right to occupy your property, okay, things of that nature. We're going to talk about that more later. This is just some foundational concepts, but it's called the bundle of legal rights. So when I talked about real estate earlier, I gave you a list of activities, and there's a much easier way to memorize this. So this next slide is, once again, just foundational. You will see it in a much neater, prettier format in the very near future, I promise. And so anytime, the acronym that we give is LL-BEANS. List, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, sell. Just like the clothing company, but with an S on the end. So this is just giving you some examples, right? Listing, selling, leasing, auctioning, and referring to doing any of these. So this isn't the pretty neat mnemonic that we have. This is just giving you an example of what would constitute real estate brokerage activities. Now understand that it's not these activities in and of itself, it's these activities in conjunction with it being real property for others for compensation. That's what constitutes brokerage activity and typically the need for a license in North Carolina. And let me explain why. If you help somebody sell a house and you do it for free, that's not brokerage activity. That's you helping a friend out. That's a favor. Now, I don't really think that I would trust a friend who has no experience doing that to help me, because who knows if they know what they're doing, but it doesn't require a license because it's not real property for others for compensation. Same thing, folks, if you try to help your friend sell some gym equipment on Facebook Marketplace, well, that's not real estate, so nobody cares. There's no laws and rules about a lot of different things. But because of the sensitive nature and the complexity of real estate sales, there's special laws and rules that kick in because it does deal with this word real property, right? There's that word real property. Now I could say real estate, I could say land, I could say real property. But if you're dealing with any of those and you're doing it for somebody other than yourself and you're getting paid to do it, then we're going to be dealing with brokerage activity, a license being required. Torianta, I don't know what you're looking at. Everybody's camera is on. I'm looking at a whole bunch of y'all's right now. So, I have a second device in here, so that camera's off. Then I got a couple people who I think are still working on some bandwidth issues that their camera is off, but everybody else's camera is on. So, yeah. So let's talk about a license, folks. This, what you see on this screen that I'm sharing with you right now, this is actually called a pocket card. A pocket card is just evidence of you having a license. This is what the actual license looks like. 8.5 by 11 on a seal from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission with a number on it and, all these different things. So you can be proud of it. You can hang it up on your wall next to your cat picture, right? Because that's what normal people do. Why would you not? But this right here is called a pocket card. What you got, April?
I just wanted to ask, is brokerage activity and real estate activity, are those interchangeable?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Real estate activity is brokerage, right? Because we said that you're going to be a broker helping facilitate deals. That's the brokerage activity. That's the real estate that we're going to be doing. Absolutely the same thing. Excellent question. So what this license allows you to do is any of those LL Beans activities: list, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, sell, and I promise there's going to be a slide for this. Real property for others for compensation. So every single one of you in here right now could go help a friend buy a house, give them advice, and get paid nothing, and you've done nothing illegal. But if any of you go out and help a friend buy a house and get compensated for it, that's illegal. I can do that. Why? Because I have a broker's license. So I am allowed to broker deals for real estate and get compensated for it. That is the whole purpose of this class. To get a license so you can legally be paid for real estate activities. So the license is what you're endeavoring to get right now. Now this next slide, not super consequential because we've already kind of talked about it. This is from the Relink book, okay? Minimum criteria to be a licensee: 18, sane, sober, legal citizen, U.S. national, permanent resident, valid work visa, something like that. So make sure that you meet the criteria for the license. And I know a couple of you are not 18, but that's okay because you will be by the time that you apply for this license. And so let's take this a step further with this discussion, all right? If you are selling your own house, you don't need a license. If you're buying a house for yourself, you don't need a license. If you're renting out your own personal property, you don't need a license. You can always do stuff for yourself with no license needed, which is where when one of you asked about managing, your mother-in-law's properties, they're going to need a license. Your mother-in-law can manage your own properties. Why? Because it's not for others. It's her own. But if you wanted to manage them, now you're doing it for others, and you're probably going to get paid for it, which would trigger the need for a license. Now, if you work for others and do it for free, that's called a favor. That's not brokerage activity. Once again, I don't know why anybody would trust you and ask for your help if you don't know what you're doing. It's not advisable, but if you do it, it's not brokerage activity. If you help somebody sell their house and charge them nothing, it's not illegal. If you help somebody buy a house and charge them nothing, it's not illegal. You don't need a license. If you manage somebody's property for them for free, not illegal, don't need a license. But the second that you're dealing with real property for somebody other than yourself and getting anything of value, a license is needed. And I mean anything of value, folks. If they give you a $5 Starbucks gift card for, collecting some leases or signing some documents, you need a license. You just got something of value for helping people with brokerage. What you got, Valerie?
So if I understand correctly, some people might work illegally here. Like, for example, the rental arbitrage. They are talking about a lot of that out there. It's like renting other properties and like rental arbitrage. So if I'm not licensed, for example, and I'm renting from other people and trying to make some money from it, it's illegal also, right?
Yes, it is. And so in North Carolina, and let me just help you out, Valerie's talking about rental arbitrage, and let's just throw wholesaling into the mix. Wholesaling, and a lot of the iterations of wholesaling and rental arbitrage are being done illegally in North Carolina because, think about it, if you rent out a property, you don't own it. And then you turn around and you're advertising that property for rent. You're doing it on behalf of somebody else. It's not your property. You are not the owner. And so that's illegal because you're advertising real estate and you're collecting money for advertising real estate and you don't have a license. Same thing if you're doing wholesaling. If you get under contract to buy a house and then start advertising that house for somebody else to take over your purchase contract and you sell that, you're advertising real property that's somebody else's and going to get paid to do it. That'd be illegal because you don't have a license.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wow. Good to know.
Yeah. What you got, Steve?
Okay, so my question would be, what if you own, let me put in perspective, like, what if you own the trailer, but you don't own the land? How would that work?
Yeah, that's slightly different, and you're probably going to be okay because you are renting out something that you do actually own. You're just paying lot rent, which is a little bit different than just like renting something completely different. I'll tell you that's so oddly specific that there's no real outline in the Real Estate Commission laws and rules in North Carolina that state that you can or can't do that. So I would argue that you'd probably be okay. But this is where some of these laws and rules are complex and some of the situations are complex, right?
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So when we're dealing with somebody else, okay, you're helping somebody in any way, shape, or form, and it deals with real estate, and it's not you, and you get paid, you need a license. Doesn't matter how little it is, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter how many you do, doesn't matter if it's a family member. Bless you. Bless you.
Thank you.
What you got, April?
I was just wondering if that applied to like managing Airbnbs for people, or I know like some people rent houses and then turn them into Airbnbs even though they don't own them.
Yeah, arguably speaking, it does, because you don't own it, and so the only difference is. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole because there's so many unique types of real estate that it would be very dependent on the exact dynamic. That, we can't put a blanket terminology on there because if what you're doing is leasing out a space and then you've got permission to sublease and all you're doing is advertising your sublease, that could be a little bit different. But the long end of it, let me give you an example if this helps you understand this. I had a student in a post-licensing class one time who got her license because her sister owned Airbnbs. And she was getting her license to help her sister manage those Airbnbs. And so when we get into it later, I'm going to start talking about this in a more in-depth conversation. And so ultimately what I will reveal to you is that if you are the employee of an entity owner, then you don't need a license. And so when I relayed that to her, she's like, wait, did I even need a license? And I said, well, it depends. I said, does your sister own those properties, or does an entity own those properties? And she said, oh, my sister. And then I said, yes, you need a license. Because if Susan owns the properties and Susan wants her sister Mary to manage the properties, that is somebody other than herself. And if she's going to be paying her, that requires a broker's license. But if Awesome Investments LLC own this property, Awesome Investments LLC could hire Mary as an employee, and then a license wouldn't be needed because there is an exemption for entity owners. Because, folks, entities are not one person. Everybody who is an employee of an entity is that entity. And so there's a little bit of an exemption there. So it gets a little confusing. So let's not focus on the Airbnb rental arbitrage, because that's going to confuse you on your test, because it depends on the scenarios. But the general rule of thumb, if you're doing anything with real property, list, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, selling, referring or offering to do those things, real property for others for compensation, license is required. And we're going to talk about this in really great detail later in Unit 1 when we circle back around to it. This is still just some of the foundational pieces for you. What you got, Winston?
Okay, say I'm trying to get my license, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know an agent, and I get him a referral. Am I able to accept a referral fee?
No, it'd be illegal. Because you referred somebody to do brokerage, and it's not you, and it deals with real property. If they send you a referral, they compensated you, you were paid for illegal brokerage activity. It's illegal.
Gotcha.
So if the commission finds out you're in trouble, that agent's in trouble.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. So I just talked about an entity. Now we're going to talk about entities quite a bit throughout this course, not because the entities are extremely testable, but there are some certain things that you need to be aware of. When I say entity, that means you have gone to the Secretary of State and you have filled out an application to create an LLC, a partnership, a corporation, something like that. We treat entities like people, even though they're not. Have you folks ever heard of Microsoft? Yeah, I'd imagine so. Microsoft is a company. Well, if I asked you who is Microsoft, can you tell me? But you agree that Microsoft could own real property, yes? Is it possible for a company like Microsoft to own real estate?
Yes.
Yeah, of course it is. And so when we're dealing with entities, that means a business that has been created with the Secretary of State. And so from a real estate brokerage point of view, Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, Century 21, these are all entities. And because these entities are treated like people, they're getting paid for brokerage activity. Well, they can only legally do that because they get a firm license. Remember in that Relink book, a people gets a broker's license. An entity gets a firm license if it intends to do brokerage activity. So we're going to have a lot of different discussions about entities, both entity owner exemptions for whether you need a license and entities needing broker's licenses just like a people does, but it's called a firm license. So as an example, the real estate firm that Travis utilizes is called Trav Talks Real Estate Firm. It's also the name of his school. So that entity has a firm license. Travis has a broker's license. I have a broker's license. Any other agents that were affiliated with this firm would have a broker's license. Same license, just one's for an entity, one's for a people. And here's why. Can we all agree that Trav Talks can't sit in this class like you can? Because we don't know who the hell it is, just like we don't know who the hell Microsoft is. So a person called a qualifying broker exists in the business hierarchy that allows these entities to get a license. We call that person a qualifying broker. Now, once again, this is foundational. We'll talk more about the qualifying broker in a minute. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. firm, by definition, is an entity that has a broker's license, called a firm license. When you hear the word firm, that's what you need to think of. Keller Williams, Coldwell Banker, Trap Talks, whatever. But we will also talk, like I said, entities that are not needing brokerage licenses. And then we will also talk about things called a sole proprietorship. The best word that we could utilize, which is all encompassing, is brokerage. A person could operate a brokerage. A firm could operate a brokerage. Because a sole proprietorship and a firm are both brokerages, but one is a people, one is an entity. But they're both brokerages. So right now I operate independently as a sole proprietor. I'm Seth Chauncey, the brokerage. Trap Talks Real Estate Firm is an entity. It's also a brokerage. Does that make sense? Because they are both brokering deals. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So that means if the entity, when they registered on LLC, but someone will have to have the brokerage license, right, to be able to register the entity.
The entity can be created without a broker because, folks, at Microsoft, can we all agree that Microsoft is in the technology business? Do you think Microsoft has a firm license?
But for example, Century 21 to operate as a real estate entity, someone has to have the broker license, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Somebody of the team has to have.
Yep.
Okay.
It's what we call the principal member of the entity would have to have a broker's license. And we call that person a qualifying broker. We're going to talk more about that. But understand, if we break it down into steps, step one is create the entity with the Secretary of State. After you create that entity, then you would go to the Real Estate Commission and apply for a firm license. So you can create an entity first, because not every entity is going to be doing real estate, is what I'm trying to impress upon you. Just like Microsoft doesn't need a broker's license, okay? Just opening a pressure washing company doesn't need a broker's license. But when somebody creates an entity that's going to do real estate brokerage like Century 21, like Keller Williams, after they create the entity, before they can do anything real estate related, they would need to apply for a firm license with the Real Estate Commission, just like you folks have to get a people's license before you can start going out and helping people buy and sell homes. Yeah. What you got, April?
Specific types of LLCs and other things that you like have to, like, are there different like subsets that make it so you can get that brokerage license? Like, me and my ex-husband own a food truck. Could I like go and get my license and all of a sudden be a food truck / firm weird combination?
That's an excellent question. You could. Here's the exception. Now, this is outside of the scope of this class, but because you asked the question, I'll answer it. There are 22 professional service industries in North Carolina. And so things like architects, surveyors, attorneys are professional service entities. So if you created an entity that fell under the category of professional services, they cannot get a firm license. But if you own an LLC called Awesome Eats LLC, and then you meet the criteria to get a firm license, you could get a firm license for Awesome Eats LLC and start doing brokerage and burritos.
All right.
There you go. What you got, Coleman?
So I'm aware, even without an LLC. I mean, I know LLCs are super just easy to go online and apply, and you can have an LLC within the day. I know realtors, as is, are already able to write off a couple things for taxes, like phone bills and gas and things like that. If you have an out-of-town client at dinner, maybe you can write some of these things off.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering if I'm correct, when you become an LLC. So if I were to, like, so I just want to mention an Airbnb. Well, I'll go with that just for the hypothetical argument here. If I were to own an Airbnb, if I owned that Airbnb under my own LLC, would that not put me in a separate tax bracket that would let me keep more of the profit than I would have if I was just on my own? I was researching somewhere, and I know for investing, it's definitely true, but I didn't know if it had the same type of effect on earnings from like a rental property or something like that.
Yeah, so ultimately, the easiest, most straightforward answer I can give you is, once again, it depends. It depends on what your CPA says. It depends on how you're filing your taxes. It depends on if you have employees or not. Are there some tax benefits to having an entity versus not? Of course there are. Are there some insurance benefits to having an entity versus not? Of course there are. Now, when it comes down to it, Coleman, for a real estate broker, you already hit the nail on the head. We are already considered independent contractors, and so we are considered self-employed, and so we can already deduct all of our business expenses. You know, your gas, your travel, your marketing, your photos, your, you know, all these different things are tax deductible, even without creating an entity. So are there still some benefits to creating an entity for certain things? Yeah, but you know, there's no one size fits all. It all should be discussed with a business attorney and or a CPA to figure out if it's really worth the addition, because there are additional costs, because you got, you know, your yearly filing for having this entity. So it's just dependent. There's no one size fits all on that. So yeah. What you got, Gerard?
Yeah, just to go back to the example of Century 21 and Microsoft. Century 21 needs a firm license because they are totally devoted to real estate business, while Microsoft, whatever their business is, incidental only. The practice of real estate is only incidental to their properties. That's not their main goal. So they don't have to apply for a firm license, otherwise just only an entity. Is that correct?
Kind of. Century 21 needs a firm license because they are brokering deals. Microsoft doesn't need a firm license because they are buying their own properties. You already told me that if you own a house, can't you sell it right now without needing a license?
Exactly. That's why that's only incidental to their business.
Yeah, and so like, right, but don't confuse incidental with it's for others, because they're only buying it for themselves. So I wouldn't even call it incidental. I would call it direct acquisition of Microsoft. But yes, you're correct, because Microsoft is the one purchasing them and selling them and managing them. They don't need a license because it's not for others.
Okay.
Yeah. Century 21 is not buying the houses. They're helping other people buy the houses. Century 21 is not selling the houses. They're helping other people sell the houses, which is why they're doing brokerage activity and they need a license. What you got, Valerie?
Yeah, just to make it clear, let's say I have my own LLC in any industry, let's say hospitality industry, and then I become a broker and I work under one firm, like let's say Coldwell. Can I ask them, for example, to get paid, to get paid through my LLC instead of me as a broker?
Yes, when you get a firm license for that entity, because you can't pay your hospitality entity, your LLC, for brokerage activity, because if you pay a person or an entity that's unlicensed, you pay them for illegal brokerage activity. You see how that works? Because you're trying to collect a real estate compensation to something that doesn't have a license. That's why firm licenses exist. If you want your entity to get paid for brokerage activity, your entity needs a thing license called a firm license.
Okay.
So once you get a firm license for that entity, can you be paid into it? Yes, you can.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. Also, don't forget to put your hands down, folks, after I answer a question. I don't like to manually put them down because just in case you have another question. Ayana, what you got?
Yeah, I was just wondering, back to the LLC. So I'm a licensed hairstylist, so I have a business, and I was trying to get an LLC for that. But are you saying it would have to be two separate, LLCs if I was to, once I'm a licensed broker?
No, there's no requirement to have an LLC as a broker. Can you create one? Can you open a brokerage firm? Yes, you can, but this is just an option. Most people never create an entity. Most people have a broker's license as a person and go work for a firm like Coldwell Banker or Century 21. So the vast majority of people will never even create an entity. Now, if you desire to create one, you can. And if you wanted to get a firm license for your current entity, you could, as long as hairstylist isn't one of the 22 professional service entities. And I don't know whether it is or not. But if you create an entity and it's a professional service entity for hairstyling, you would have to create a separate entity for brokerage. But a lot of you are, these are very specific questions, and we're not quite there yet. And ultimately, that you'll cross that bridge when you get your license. I really want to focus on what's the testable piece of these entities, but you know.
Okay.
Yeah. What you got? Kodia? Cody, how do you say it?
Katia.
Kadia. Dang it.
Katia, yeah.
I want your parents' address. I'm writing them a letter. I just feel like slighted. I don't know why I'm having such difficulty with your name. Kadia. Okay.
Just to piggyback off of Coleman's comment. So my husband and I, we do long-term and short-term rentals. One of them is actually in the Gatlinburg industry area. And with that, some areas with short-term rentals, you are required to have an LLC in order to operate in that industry. For example, when we went and purchased in the Gatlinburg area during 2021, we did not think we had to open up a business per se. Come to find out, we did. We had to create an LLC. We had to say why we were creating this LLC, and it was for real estate purposes. Now, you're saying in North Carolina, now my plan was to utilize that LLC because it is already for real estate. But I would not be able to, I guess, file my income under, which I guess this is a tax question, not a you question. But I would have to register as a firm, I'm assuming, right?
If you want to start doing real estate business in North Carolina and get paid into an entity, that entity needs a firm license. Just like you folks cannot get paid for helping people buy and sell houses without the license that you're sitting here to get, an entity cannot get paid for helping people buy and sell houses, even though you're the one that did it, unless it is licensed in North Carolina. So you would also have to register it as a foreign entity in North Carolina first, if it's registered only in Gatlinburg and not registered here as a foreign entity yet. So you'd have to register it as a foreign entity, get a firm license for it, and then you could be paid into it.
Yeah, I mean, we're in Florida. That's where we house our LLC. That's where it's registered as Florida. Might be a whole different animal.
It might be a whole different animal. And remember, there's no requirement to run your income through an LLC. It's just an avenue. But if you go down that avenue, that entity does need a firm license.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
So, a people needs... There you go, April. Open houses are going to be food truck rodeos. I like it. A people needs a broker's license. An entity would need, if it's doing brokerage activity, an entity would need a firm license. Now, as I'm trying to articulate, there are plenty of businesses that don't need firm licenses. Microsoft doesn't need one. It's not doing real estate. Folks, Food Line doesn't need one either. Okay, Food Line is selling food. So plenty of businesses that exist that don't. But if the business is helping people buy and sell houses, doing brokerage activity, then it needs a license. Now let me explain something. I told you that I operate as a sole proprietor. All that means is that I don't have an entity. I can do everything that a firm can do, right? If you wanted to compare and contrast what I can do and what a Coldwell Banker can do, there's no difference. Because I am a BIC. I can advertise, I can have trust accounts, and we're going to talk more about these terms. If you don't know what I'm talking about yet, that's normal. I can affiliate other brokers. Folks, I can affiliate when you all get your license, because I'm a BIC, and that's the only requirement for provisional brokers to activate their license is a firm or a BIC, right? So if you join a firm has to have a BIC. Well, you don't actually legally have to join a firm. You could join a sole proprietor, because I'm a broker in charge. So I could supervise all of you. But you understand what I'm saying? So as a sole proprietor, I could have 500 licensees. The only thing that makes me a sole proprietor is that I'm operating as a person. I didn't create a business entity. That's the only difference between a firm and a sole proprietor. One is not operating with a firm license, it's operating with a people license. You're running a business through a person. In a firm, we created an entity. The business is running through an entity that was created with the Secretary of State, and it has a firm license. Does that make sense? And so I want you to understand that there's going to be some very deep nuances on test questions when we're talking about sole proprietors and firms. But before we get there, I want you to understand this. If you look at this person right here, and I told you that there was some type of real estate setup here, would you tell me that this is a sole proprietor or a brokerage firm?
You don't know that yet.
Sole proprietor.
I would say sole proprietor.
I think so. We don't know. So we don't know based on the picture.
Can't tell.
Okay.
There you go.
don't know.
Folks, you can't tell. Your assumption is sole proprietor, but I have an entity. I just never bothered to get a firm license with it. Folks, it takes a person to create an entity. And it takes an entity to get a firm license. But seeing a picture of a person isn't enough, because you could start a firm today called ABC Realty and you could be the only person. And so that could be ABC Realty in its entirety. Because you could have created an entity, could have gotten a firm license, but it would have been a single person entity. We honestly don't know. So be very careful. Because I could just as easily have applied for a firm license for my entity. Now I have my reasons as to why I don't, because I have an entity. All my education stuff goes through my entity. Well, education doesn't require a firm license. But license brokerage activity does. Selling and all that different things. So there's no way to tell just by looking at this picture. Conversely, if I showed you these four lovely models here, and I said, tell me, are they operating as a sole proprietorship or are they operating as a firm? What would you tell me?
We don't know.
You still don't know.
Still don't know. What you got, Lex?
As a sole proprietor, does that mean you take like 100% of commission? Or are you still...
No, it's me, myself, and I. So the only person I'm splitting with is myself.
Okay.
But I didn't do it overnight. Now, I understand, Lex, I've been doing this for 7.5 years. I've only been independent for about 7 months. If that tells you anything. So it's not something you want to rush to in any way, shape, or form. But the point here is, I could have 7,000 licensees under me as a sole proprietor. It's just that everything passes through me, Seth Chauncey, the broker. If I created an entity and got a firm license, I could name it, the Chauncey Group, Realty. And everything would pass through that. That's the only difference between a sole proprietor and a firm. Is one is an entity created with the Secretary of State, which is what a firm is, and one is a business passing through a person. A sole proprietorship never would have a firm license. I don't need one. I have a people license. Does that make sense? So let's get into some other terminology here to wrap up in the last couple minutes I have, all right? There are so many words. April, you just give me a thumbs up that you understand what I was saying? Is that what that was? Okay, cool, Tim. I always get confused because sometimes I'm like, oh no, they tried to raise their hand, they just hit the wrong button. So I'd like to check that you knew what you were doing. There are so many different terminologies and things that I'm going to introduce to you, okay? And one of the main things that are going to drive you nuts, but they're very, very important to understand, is what we call or and e words, okay? Or and e words. Not to be confused with the character from Winnie the Pooh if you do them backwards, right? E's and ors, Eeyore, okay? Not Eeyore, ors and e's. And so when we're dealing with ors and e's, please understand that if the word ends in or, think give or. Okay, give or. And if the word ends in ee, think receivee. Okay, if I give you a present, I'm the giver. And if you accept that present, you are the receivee. And all of these words that I'm going to introduce that use ors and e's work the same way. The or is the give or, the e is the receive e. Who is giving, who is getting? Yeah, I know, Lakeith, at this part. Oh, and it doesn't stop. Kat says, can you please share the definition of a sole proprietor to the exec? Understand this, a sole proprietor is just a fancy word for somebody doing business in their name. Folks, if you went out today and you started a pressure washing business and it was just passing it through, just doing it yourself, you're a sole proprietor. You're just doing business. That's all a sole proprietor is. A person doing business. You haven't created a business, you're a person doing business. And so for me, I'm a person doing real estate brokerage with a broker's license. That's all a sole proprietor is. And we're going to talk about sole proprietors in a lot more detail in the near future. I'm just trying to get you under the foundational piece. No. Let's not the DBA. Hang tight on that. DBA stands for doing business as. Doing business as is something a sole proprietor could do. For example, folks, if I wanted to operate as a sole proprietor and call myself the, Seth is Awesome Realty Group, I could if I filed a DBA, which is an assumed business certificate, where I basically tell the public that I'm advertising as something other than my name. So we'll get into DBAs a little bit, also called an assumed business certificate. Not quite the same thing. But here's the last thing I want to make here before I kind of give you an opportunity to just chit-chat with me about day one. I want you to think about this, okay? If I'm talking about the ors and es, and I was to give you the word in regard to a lease, lessor is giving up the lease, and the lessee is taking away the lease. And so I want you to think about the landlord-tenant relationship. Do you think the landlord is the lessor or the lessee?
The lessor.
The lessor. Because they are giving the lease. And so that would make the tenant the what?
Lessee.
Lessee. There you go. Or is give or e is receive. Lessor, lessee. What you got, Coleman? Oh, you're muted.
I'm gonna be completely honest with you right now. I had a question and it just escaped my brain.
Happens to me all the time. Don't feel bad about it.
I don't know where it went.
No worries. So let me end with this last slide, and what that will allow us to do is kick off right into Unit 3. I'm sorry, Torianta, you want this one? Was that the one you wanted?
The one before that. I'm sorry.
This one? Coleman, you remember your question?
Yeah, it came back to me.
No worries.
So, if we're gonna go into this in detail later, I won't hold you up. We can just go to something else. But I was wondering, is there what would the real difference be between a sole proprietor filing for a DBA and being whatever ABC Realty, and then compared to just doing an LLC named ABC Realty? Like, is that just kind of going around your elbow to get to your thumb, or are there benefits to?
There are, and the name implies it. So think about it. LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. Folks, here's the biggest thing you understand, because you're asking really good questions. If I go out and I help somebody buy a house as a sole proprietor, and I screw up, and they get mad, and they decide to sue me, they are suing Seth Chauncey. They are going after everything I own, my personal bank accounts, my house, my cars, whatever. If I create an entity, now it's not foolproof because you have to know what you're doing and you have to create it right. Otherwise, sometimes they can still get after you. The whole point of creating an entity is you basically put somebody in front of you. They shield you. Say, this is the business, not me, this is. And so if the business messes up, they're suing the business. And sometimes if structured correctly, somebody can only go after your business accounts and your business insurance, not the owner. That's the point. Legal protection, limiting your liability by putting somebody else in the shoes of, go after that person. Even though you're the owner, go after that. All right? That's why. And so there's a time and a place to do it, but that's an excellent question. There are reasons why you would do an entity. It's to protect you. Even if it's done right, you could protect your personal assets.
The LLC is like kind of safer.
It's safer, absolutely. Safer and additional tax benefits sometimes. Yeah. So here's the last thing, folks. This slide is going to make a comeback later. These are a lot of different terminologies. You use this or and the E. And I want you to understand, I already asked you this question, and I had you tell me what you thought a mortgage was, and I already told you you're wrong. And so here's the most confusing thing. With your general understanding of mortgagor and mortgagee, who do you think the mortgagor is?
The banks?
Yeah, that's what you think, but it's not. Because everything you know about a mortgage is wrong. The mortgagor is the borrower, the person who borrows money. The mortgagee is the bank, because what the bank lends you is money. And then you give the bank the mortgage, and where you basically give them a piece of paper that says, I promise you can take my house and sell it if I don't pay you back. So you are the giver of the mortgage, and they are the receivee of the mortgage. And that's why there's a star right here, because this is one of the most common ones that your brain bleeds when you comprehend this. Okay? Because it goes against everything you thought you knew.
So mortgage is basically just another word for collateral.
Yeah, it's a security instrument that pledges your collateral or your home as collateral for the debt. That's exactly what it is. It's not the loan itself. The loan is the loan. Yeah. What you got, Kadia?
Yes, great. Here's a little clue or a saying that maybe helps some of you. Mortgagee is never me.
There you go.
I learned that in my last class.
Yeah, mortgagee is never me.
Mortgagee is never me.
That's exactly right. The mortgagor is the borrower, and the mortgagee is never me. And the mortgagee is the bank. Now, when you're talking about these other ones, grantor means the giver of title of ownership. Grantee is the person who receives ownership. These people show up on a deed. Landlord is a lessee. Landlord is the lessor. Tenant is the lessee. Borrower is the mortgagee. Bank is the mortgagee. The person who gives an offer to purchase is called the offeror. The person who receives the offer is called the offeree. The person who gives an option, which we'll talk about later, is called the optionor. The person who receives the option is the optionee. The person who puts a trust in place is called the trustor. The person who oversees the trust is called the trustee. And that one actually has a third party. It's called a beneficiary. The beneficiary is the person who actually receives the benefit of the trust. And then devisor and devisee. Folks, when you leave somebody real property in a will, it's called a devise. And so the person who owned real property and left it to somebody in a will is called the devisor. The person who gains real property ownership by way of a will is called the devisee. So these or and e words will come back time and time again. The reason why it's very important to think of these or and e words, let me give you an example. Folks, would the buyer be the offeror or the offeree?
Offeree.
It's a trick question. You could send an offer to a seller as a buyer, and that would make you the offeror. You could send an offer to a buyer as the seller, that would make you the offeror. It could be either.
Neither.
Yeah, it could be either. Everybody understand that? So that's why we don't use, in a lot of these situations, we have to use these terminology that are very specific. Offeror is whoever sent the offer. It could be the buyer or the seller. Offeree is whoever received the offer. It could be the buyer or the seller. So it's not safe to use words like buyer and seller in a lot of contexts because it could be either. And so these words are very important. Everybody with me? And we're going to talk about them. This is not the only time we're going to see them. This is an introduction to these or and e words. Now, that being said...
Is this in the PDF too?
Say what?
Is this in our...
Learn, Test, Pass?
Yes.
Yeah, it's in there. I mean, all the slides are in there. And so, I mean, if yeah, all these slides are in there. Right now. Now, that being said, folks, I got a couple minutes left with you. So let me just say a couple things. Y'all been a blast and a half. I'm very excited for all the time we're going to spend together. Y'all been a great bunch, and y'all are already asking fantastic questions, which makes me super, super excited about the time we've got together. Please get started.